Today I'm going to be watching a video about a girl who moved to Canada. It's called Why I Left England for Canada. I really like watching these videos, seeing people's experiences moving to Canada, telling what they think about it, what they enjoy about it, any challenges and so on. This is called Toronto versus Vancouver versus Victoria, my story. Of course I made a reaction to Toronto versus Vancouver, so interested to hear more about that, but just really interested to hear another person's experience moving to Canada and what they think about it. Let's watch. You can tell me what you think about this one.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Emily, and this channel is all about living a more adventurous, unconventional, and fulfilling life. Today's video is about something that I get asked about all the time, so I figured why not make a video about it if people want to know, and that is about my journey to Canada, why I moved here, because if some of you don't know me, I'm originally from the United Kingdom. I moved to Canada almost 5 years ago, and I've lived in 2 provinces in Canada, so I'm going to talk about why I moved to Canada, if I'd recommend moving to Canada, what I like or what I don't like about Canada, and the big debate, which is better, Ontario, which is where I first moved to, or British Columbia, which is where I live now. Or what another big debate is, Toronto versus Vancouver. So, I'll start with why I moved to Canada. I'd always wanted to live in a country other than my own, so way back in 2015 I kind of did an eeny meeny miny mo of where I was going to live. It was very close between Australia and Canada, and I eventually chose Canada because it offered a better working holiday visa. You can get a working holiday for Australia for 2 years. You have to start with 1 year and then it goes on to 2 with farm work, but in Canada you get given, as a Brit, 2 years, and it is not restricted, which means that you can work for the same employer for the length of your visa. Originally my plan was to move to Vancouver, but as some of you may also know, my partner is from a place just outside of Ontario, so I actually ended up going there first and staying there for longer than I thought I was going to. We first moved to Toronto in 2016. We were very torn between the East End and the West End, but we eventually decided on the West End because we felt like we kind of frequented more of the bars and restaurants and shops in the West End, and it was also closer to get to places like Niagara or to the States. The border is really close, and just to other places that we wanted to go to, Muskoka, Collingwood, etc, etc. So we settled in the West End of Toronto in a place called Roncesvalles, which is also known as Little Poland. Originally it was where a lot of Polish people settled, and there's still a very large Eastern European influence there. I really loved it. I had a lot of Eastern European friends back home, so I felt very at home there. I loved the Polish shops. It was one of my favorite things about the neighborhood, and it's one of the things that I loved most about living there. But also Roncesvalles has a lot of great little coffee shops. We had a bunch of our favorites. One of our favorites was a place called Extra Butter. If you're ever in the neighborhood, I'd highly recommend it. It's one of my favorite coffee shops still to date, and the staff that work there are so awesome. And it's also really close to Ossington and Dundas West, which was our favorite place in the city to kind of go out for dinner or drinks. We had a lot of friends there, which is why we decided to not only move there but also stay there. At the time it was also one of the cheapest places to live. Toronto is notorious for its rental prices and house prices, so if you're looking to move to Toronto and you want somewhere cheap to live, I would not recommend the West End anymore. It's got very expensive. Most places in Toronto are very expensive, but if you look around you can still find kind of basement apartments or little apartments that are maybe a little bit further out in places like Etobicoke or maybe further north.
Yeah, tell me about that, because she says she moved there like 4 or 5 years ago. Have the house price rental or rental prices really increased that much over that time period? Is it the same for Vancouver as well? If you live in either Vancouver or Toronto, would you move outside of the city just to get cheaper rent? Does it make sense? What sort of nice areas are in these places?
However, if you do have a bit of a budget for a rental in the West End, then I would highly recommend it. I'd still, if I moved back to Toronto, which I can't ever see myself doing for reasons that I'll explain later, but if I ever did or needed to, I would definitely live in the West End. It's still to my day my favorite part of the city. There's so much to love about Toronto, but really the best part about the city is the summertime. It really comes to life in the summer. It's a totally different place. There's the big lakefront, there's the big lake life scene that's there. You know, there's lots of bars and restaurants, patios, everyone's outside all the time. The weather is amazing. It's a little bit humid. It's very humid, which can take some getting used to, especially when the weather is kind of like 25 degrees plus, but it is so lovely, and that was one of my favorite parts about the city. There's also a lot of street festivals in the summertime, so most neighborhoods have their own little street festivals, which we really loved. Dundas West was one of our favorites, and Roncesvalles had its own too. There are festivals going on, there is the Fringe Festival, there's always something going on in the summertime. Also, the cultural scene in Toronto is extremely hard to beat. There are art galleries, museums, theatres, everything that you could ever wish for culturally in Toronto, they have it. There are so many neighbourhoods with so many different cultures. I think there's over 50% of the population of Toronto are actually born outside of Toronto or outside of Canada. I can't remember the exact statistic. So it is extremely culturally diverse. After the summertime, I think that was probably my favorite part of Toronto, because you just met people from all over the world and you could experience so many different cultures in this big warm melting pot of a city, and that's something that I absolutely loved. Now,
Yeah, tell me if you're from Toronto, do you relate to that? Is that what you like about living there? Hearing about those little events and things going on during the summer does sound fantastic. And she mentioned something there that usually people talk about Canada saying how cold it is. She said about the 25 degrees, humid, something that not a lot of people think about when you think about Canada, but that makes it very enticing, I think.
now moving on to the reason why I left Toronto, that is down to a couple of things, but probably the main reason why I personally couldn't live in Toronto for a long period of time, even though I was there for 3.5 years, so I guess that was kind of long, were the winters. The winters don't sound that bad on paper, especially when you get such amazing summers. But when you get -20 with wind chill, it is like a whole new experience to yourself. It is like nothing I've ever experienced before, and nothing I ever hope to experience again. Although I know that I will, because I'm sure I'll end up in Toronto in the winter. Or Montreal, which is actually even worse. The second time I ever went to Montreal was in the wintertime, and it was -40 with wind chill. And honestly,
That's actually scary.
I don't know how people in Montreal do it. I have so much respect for you. I personally don't like the winters anyway, and even though the winters in Toronto are quite sunny, it is so cold and you just don't want to go anywhere. And personally, I didn't even want to go anywhere ever. I had like the winter coat, I had, you know, a whole winter outfit, I had the winter boots, everything, and still I would find myself just hardly ever going outside and just really struggling in the wintertime. And the winters are really long in Toronto. They're like at least 6 months, and then sometimes you'll get the odd nice ice storm in like April, May time. So another one.
Yeah, tell me if you agree with that. If you're from Toronto and it's got these winters, what do you do? Do you stay at home a lot? Is there any sort of outdoor activities you can do or that you do?
One of the major reasons why not only did I want to move away from Toronto, but also move out of Ontario was the nature. So Ontario does have its beauty. It's on the banks of the Great Lakes, which are really, really beautiful, and there's Muskoka in the north. But for me, coming from the UK, it just wasn't as exciting as what, one, I had been used to already, and two, what I'd really expected and hoped from for Canada. You know, when you like Google Canada and you see the Rocky Mountains and you see Alberta and British Columbia and you're like, that is the Canada that I want. And then you kind of got to Ontario and you're like, this is nice, but like, is this it? Ontario is always very extreme with its weather too, as I was saying. Like, in the wintertime it's very cold, and in the summertime it's really, really hot, and you don't really get much of that in-between weather, which is kind of my favourite place. So if you're an outdoorsy person like I am, then perhaps that is something that you'd want to consider. The hiking trails are really nice, but they're nothing too crazy, and for me, I found myself getting bored really, really quickly. Although there are a lot of great road trips and day trips, and it is really close to the States, and if you want to, you can drive to like New York City, which we did once, and that was really great, but it was like 9 hours, 8-9 hours, and it's not something that you necessarily do all the time. So points for Toronto is that the summers are amazing. It's fairly close to Europe, I guess. It's like, what, 6 hours from the UK, so that was always a bonus, and it was a direct flight.
Yeah, definitely
so
compared to Vancouver.
It's close to the east coast of the United States. You can drive down there, and it's super culturally diverse. So why did I move to British Columbia? Well, British Columbia was the place that I always wanted to be. I had originally planned to move to Vancouver, and I had always had my heart set on living here. Now, as you may know, I didn't actually move to Vancouver in the end. I moved to Victoria, which is on Vancouver Island. Vancouver Island is just off the coast of Vancouver, but it's actually a little bit closer to Seattle than it is to Vancouver, I think. When we were deciding to move to British Columbia, we did look at Vancouver, but again, like Toronto, Vancouver is notoriously expensive, and we were just not into city living. I'm from a place that is in the north of England and quite small, and bustling big cities was kind of exciting at first, especially in Toronto, but I kind of got tired of it quite quickly, and I didn't really want that. I wanted somewhere where I could be close to nature, where we could go on day trips really easily, where we could walk to awesome hiking trails, and for me, I really just wanted to be able to walk to the ocean. So we ended up coming to Vancouver Island, and honestly, I have all of the good things and hardly any bad things to say about it. I guess in a way, just because of the weather and things, I'm a little bit biased and would say that British Columbia massively trumps Ontario, but it also depends really on what your priorities are and what you like to do in your free time. If, for example, you're big into concerts and theatre, perhaps Vancouver Island or even Vancouver isn't the best place for you. Maybe Toronto is the better place for you because it does have more of those things. And when we were in Toronto, we often frequented the theatre. Of course, the theatres are very expensive, and concerts are too, and sports games and things like that. So if that is your thing, then perhaps Toronto is your go-to place. But for me, I was more interested in nature and outdoorsy stuff and being close to the ocean, which is why I personally prefer British Columbia to Ontario or to Toronto.
Yeah, man, you can really see the two distinct styles or the distinct advantages of each of these places, Toronto and Vancouver. Obviously, Victoria has its own advantages as well. Tell me if you agree and you relate to these, as I mentioned before. But Vancouver, yeah, definitely seems like the outdoor place. Toronto's like the party, culture, fast-paced type of place.
I also prefer Vancouver to Toronto. I just prefer the city. I think that it's so much more manageable. It's so much more beautiful. I just feel happier when I'm in Vancouver, even though people go on and talk about it, that it rains a lot. I personally, being a Brit, don't really find that really affects me too much. And here on Vancouver Island, we get, I think it's more than half of the rainfall that Vancouver gets, and we get a ton more sunshine. I can't remember the exact statistic, but we get a lot less rain and a lot more sunshine than Vancouver, which was another draw to the island for me. A lot of people say about the island being kind of disconnected from the mainland, but you can get pretty much everything that you need on the island. I've never felt a need to kind of go off and go to the mainland other than for just like a trip. But if you did need to get to the mainland, there are multiple ways you can get there. There are like float planes, there is a ferry, and there is just the airport. It's like a 15-minute flight from the airport, so it's super easy to get to the mainland if you really want to. But on Vancouver Island, there is so much to explore. There's so much nature. As I say, you can walk to the ocean, which is just the best thing ever. Honestly, I will never grow tired of it. We get the Olympic Mountains. We can see just mountains everywhere we go. There is just beautiful mountains and nature. The trails here are just like mind-blowing, and up the coast is Tofino, which is, and Nuku'alofa, which are just stunning in their own rights. They're very famous in Canada. You might have heard of Tofino, especially. It's a big surf town here. And I just love the island. Like when you drive up the island, it almost feels like you're in Hawaii or something. Like there's just big green mountains everywhere, and like these big lakes, and it's just like forests. The rainforests are just outstanding. And honestly, I've just been through winter here, and it was the easiest winter of my entire life. No joke. It was easier than any place I've lived in the UK. It was 100% easier than living in Ontario. Honestly, it didn't really even feel like winter. We had like one day of really intense snowfall which melted within 2 days, and other than a couple of weeks of rainy weather or grey weather, it's been double digits or like close to double digits, and it has been glorious.
I didn't actually realise Vancouver was so nice during the winter. I've always said if I was going to move to Canada, it would probably be Vancouver. Knowing that the winters are so nice and manageable, that actually makes it even like more attractive as a place to live. Tell me if that's the case in your experience. Although I do love the snow as well. I love a snowy Christmas and things like that as well. But that does sound actually quite nice.
Sometimes like the island doesn't really know winter. It's kind of gone from like fall into spring. Like it never really had a long winter, which for me is amazing. I mean, right now it's the start of March and it's double digits, and honestly it's the most glorious weather. I went out for a walk earlier and there are cherry blossoms and all of the spring flowers, and it just makes me so happy inside. Honestly, I can't even tell you the change in my mental health and happiness. Just living in a place that is just abundant with nature is the best thing in the world. And so I guess if I was to say which one do I prefer out of Ontario or British Columbia or Toronto or Vancouver Island, I would 100%, because of what I value the most and what I want, I would 100% say British Columbia, Vancouver, or Vancouver Island especially, because for me, this is by far the most beautiful place I've ever lived and the happiest I've ever been living in a place. And finally, would I recommend you guys do it? Would I recommend upping your life in wherever you are to come live in Canada or perhaps live somewhere else? And to that, I would ask you, if it is on your heart to move somewhere, if you're thinking, I would really like to move abroad, I would really like to see what it's like, I'd love to have that experience, then I would 100% say yes, because you regret the things most that you didn't do. So if it is on your heart and you're thinking to yourself and you're questioning, should I do it? I would 100% say yes. If you have the opportunity to go live somewhere else, even if it is just for a short while, honestly, being an expat and living abroad has been the best experience of my life. I always say it was the best decision that I ever made. It wasn't the easiest decision that I ever made, and it wasn't the most well thought out or planned decision that I ever made, but it was absolutely the best, and I've learned more about myself and grown more than I ever had in all of the years running up to living abroad. And especially Canada. Obviously I am here so I can speak to Canada a lot more than anywhere else, but I absolutely adore this country. It is my home now. I call it my home, and I am so proud to live here and to be engulfed in the culture, and especially the beautiful indigenous culture of this country. And I just think that it is a wonderful country, and I can't speak highly enough of it. Obviously it has its problems, every country has its problems, but for me, for what I value in life, Canada, British Columbia, and especially Vancouver Island are just one of the most wonderful places to be. So if I sound like you and you have the same values and loves as I do, I would 100% recommend trying it out. And even if you don't live here, just come visit, because honestly it is a beautiful place and it's something that I can guarantee that you will not regret. I really hope you enjoyed this video. It was highly requested, so
Oh, that was an absolutely glowing reference for Canada. It just got more and more positive. She clearly loves her life there, and I think that's the experience of a lot of, pretty much it'll be most people who move to Canada probably share her experience. It's just overwhelmingly positive. It's just such a great country. I mean, having that nature, like when she talks about the difference between Ontario and Vancouver, I can really see her light up in how much she appreciates living in Vancouver, having that access to nature. That's something I really would love as well. I kind of have a similar story in a way that, but not moving to Canada, moving like and being an expat, as I said before, for the last 12 or 13 years I've lived in Asia. I love the experience living in another country. I don't think I could see myself going back to Scotland unless it's for my family, for my kids, for education and things like that. But Canada is definitely somewhere I would love to move to. I would definitely consider it seriously. Watching videos like this and seeing people's real experience again makes it more enticing. And this one itself really reinforces Vancouver as an option for me. But tell me what you think about it. Tell me what you think about Canada, the difference between Toronto and Vancouver and Victoria. Tell me if you relate to any of her experiences. Tell me if there's anything you don't agree with that she said as well. But yeah, why I left England for Canada. Thanks.